What if the motel room you checked into last night still had the previous guest inside, watching you from the walls? It was just supposed to be one night. A long drive from Nevada to Arizona, a dead phone, and a storm that turned the desert highway into a black void. When the rain started hammering down like nails on metal, Ethan Cole spotted a flickering sign through the fog. Moonlight Motel, vacancy. He almost laughed when he pulled in. The building looked like it hadn't seen a guest in years. 1 story high, 12 rooms, all arranged in a crooked line like teeth that had rotted over time. Neon lights buzzed overhead, fighting against the darkness. The front office light was on, but no one stood at the counter. A small bell sat next to a faded guest book. Ethan rang it twice before an old man emerged from the back, thin, stooped, with skin that looked paper thin under the fluorescent light. "Evening," the man croaked. "You're lucky. Only 1 room left. Number 9. Ethan chuckled nervously. "This place gets that busy, huh?" The old man didn't laugh. He just slid over a tarnished key. Not a card, an actual brass key. "We don't get many folks anymore," he said quietly. "But when we do, they don't usually stay long." Something in his tone made Ethan pause, but exhaustion outweighed curiosity. He signed the guest book and noticed something strange. The last entry was dated October 12, 1996. Today was June 3, 2022. He raised an eyebrow. "You guys don't get much business in 26 years?" The old man smiled without humor. "You could say that." Room 9 was at the far end of the lot. The paint peeled like dead skin. The number on the door was half missing, but the brass key fit perfectly. The room smelled faintly of mold and old cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was yellowed and bubbling, and a single bulb flickered above the bed. Still, it was dry, and the heater worked. Ethan threw his bag on the chair, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed. That's when he heard it. A faint knocking, not from the door but inside the wall behind the headboard. 3 short taps. Then silence. He froze, listening. Maybe it was pipes or the storm. But a few minutes later it came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time closer, louder, like knuckles brushing hollow wood. Ethan sat up. "Hello?" No answer, just the rain. He tried to shake it off and switched on the small TV. Static, no channels. He flipped it off, annoyed. The room felt colder than before, though he hadn't touched the thermostat. When he finally turned off the light to sleep, the knocking returned, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Then whispering. It wasn't words, not exactly. Just a sound that felt human, like breath scraping across the drywall. Ethan's chest tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He turned on his phone flashlight and pressed his ear against the wall. Something shifted inside, like fabric dragging against wood. Then, a laugh. Low, childlike. He stumbled backward, dropping his phone. "Who's there?" No reply. The whispering stopped. He spent the rest of the night sitting upright, the TV's static flickering in the corner. Sometime near dawn, he must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, sunlight was pouring through the blinds. For a brief second, everything looked normal again, until he saw the mirror. The bathroom mirror was fogged, but not from steam. There were words scrawled across it, written with a finger. "Check out before midnight." Ethan's blood ran cold. He wiped the glass, but the letters didn't vanish. They were under the surface, etched into the mirror itself. He grabbed his bag and bolted for the front desk. The old man was there again, sitting perfectly still, as if he hadn't moved all night. Ethan slammed the key down. "Someone's messing around in that room. I heard knocking all night, and then there's writing in the damn mirror." The old man didn't react. His eyes were blank. "Did you sleep in there?" he asked quietly. "What?" "Yeah, The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "You shouldn't have done that." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned forward. "That room's been locked since '96. A family stayed there. Husband, wife, little girl. They never checked out. When we finally opened the door, there was no one inside, just blood. The police sealed it. I shouldn't have rented it to you. Must have grabbed the wrong key. Ethan stared at him. That's not possible. I was in there all night. The old man shook his head. Then you weren't alone. Ethan's skin crawled. He stormed back toward the room, determined to prove it was all just superstition. The old man called after him, but he didn't listen. When he reached room 9, something was wrong. The door stood slightly open, and inside the air was icy cold. Everything looked exactly as he left it, except the walls. The wallpaper was ripped, torn in strips, and beneath it he saw wood, not drywall, but old timber boards like the inside of a barn. Each board had deep scratches, some shaped almost like letters, others like fingernails dragged in panic. He leaned closer and realized something. There were holes behind the wallpaper, eye-sized holes, dozens of them. He pressed his flashlight in one, expecting darkness. But he saw something moving, a quick, jerky shape, and then, unmistakably, a human eye staring back at him. Ethan staggered back, slamming into the dresser. "Jesus Christ," he shouted. The eye blinked, once, then disappeared. He ran out again, but the office was empty this time. The bell sat still. The guest book was gone. Even the Moonlight Motel sign outside had stopped flickering, now dark, dead, as if it had never been on. Ethan rushed to his car, fumbling with the keys. The rain had started again, harder than before. His engine sputtered once, then died. The motel lot stretched endlessly around him, swallowed by mist. He looked back toward the building, and his heart froze. Every single door from room 1 to 12 was wide open, and in each doorway stood a silhouette, still, watching. He couldn't see faces, just outlines, men, women, and one small figure with long hair standing in front of room 9, the same room he'd stayed in. Then, through the roar of the rain, he heard that knocking again, 3 short taps, and a whisper that seemed to echo right beside his ear. "You shouldn't have looked inside the walls." Ethan screamed and turned, but the lot was empty. When he looked back, the motel was gone, just a stretch of desert highway behind him. Hours later, a police officer found his car idling on the roadside, lights still on, doors open. No sign of Ethan, only a motel key on the dashboard, room 9. And carved into the metal of the key were 3 words, "See you tonight." The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt, baking away the rain that had drenched the highway only hours before. Officer Dana Holloway stood beside the abandoned car, her boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt at the shoulder of the road. The vehicle was still warm, engine humming softly, driver's door wide open. But there was no sign of Ethan Cole. She had seen a lot in her 15 years with the Arizona State Police, but something about this scene unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. The man's phone lay on the passenger seat, still on the lock screen, wallet intact, keys in the ignition. But what drew her attention most was the brass motel key, glinting under the sun. It looked old, too old to belong to any functioning business. The tag read, "Moonlight Motel, room 9. Holloway called it in. "Dispatch, I've got a 1057 abandoned vehicle, male owner 32, registered to Ethan Cole out of Reno. Possible missing person." Static filled the radio before the operator replied. "Copy that. Moonlight Motel, you said?" "Affirmative," Dana said, squinting at the tag. A pause. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, softer this time. "That place burned down in 1997. It's been condemned for decades." Dana frowned. "What are you talking about? There's no way. This key looks new." But when she looked closer, she realized the brass wasn't shiny at all. It was worn, pitted, as if it had spent decades buried underground. And scratched faintly across the tag were words carved by hand. "See you tonight." A chill crawled up her spine despite the heat. That evening, she drove out toward the old route where the motel supposedly stood. It wasn't even on modern maps anymore, but she'd grown up in this county. She knew the back roads that twisted through the desert like veins. As she drove, the radio started to hiss and cut out, the signal fading into a low hum that almost sounded like breathing. At around 8:30 p.m., she saw it. Through the settling dusk, an outline emerged from the scrub. A long, sagging structure with 12 rooms paint-peeled to bone. Above it hung a half-dead neon sign, Moonlight Motel. Only 2 letters still glowed faintly, L and T. Dana parked and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The air felt unnaturally cold for a desert night. Each breath came out in small clouds. She walked toward the front office, her footsteps crunching over broken glass and sand. Inside, everything was coated in a layer of dust. The counter stood crooked, the guest book torn in half. On the back wall hung a frame with 12 brass keys. Only room 9 was missing. She brushed dust off the desk and noticed something strange. The calendar behind the counter was frozen on October 1996. The same month the dispatcher mentioned. There were circles drawn around the dates from the 10th to the 12th, the days before the supposed fire. A file cabinet stood in the corner, drawers half open. She flipped through faded paperwork until she found one labeled Incident Report, the Collins family. The page inside was water-stained but legible. October 12, 1996. Fire discovered at approximately 2:13 a.m. Suspected gas leak. No bodies recovered. Witness reports strange noises the night before, possibly child distress sounds. Motel permanently closed. No bodies. No resolution. Just another desert ghost story. But when Dana shone her flashlight toward the far hallway, she froze. There was a fresh footprint in the dust, boot-sized, heavy, and recent. It led straight toward room 9. Every instinct told her to call for backup. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled her forward. The door to room 9 hung slightly ajar, the brass number crooked. She pushed it open slowly. The room looked untouched by time. The wallpaper was yellowed, curled at the edges, the furniture outdated but intact. Yet the air felt heavy, charged with something electric. Dana's flashlight beam shook slightly as she scanned the room, until it caught the mirror above the sink. The words were still there. Check out before midnight. But this time, something new had been added underneath in smaller script, almost like it had been scratched by a fingernail. He didn't. A sudden noise broke the silence, a soft creak from behind the wall. She swung her flashlight toward the sound, realizing it came from behind the bed's headboard. The wallpaper bulged slightly, as if the wall was breathing. Dana took a step closer. Who's there? No response. Only a slow, hollow thump. 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 Rhythmic. Deliberate. She backed away and reached for her radio. Dispatch, I've got movement inside the structure. Possible vagrant. Her voice cut out as static hissed violently through the speaker. A faint whisper overlapped it. A child's voice, barely audible. He saw me. The radio went dead. The lights above flickered, casting the room in alternating flashes of brightness and shadow. Dana's pulse hammered in her ears. She ripped open the wallpaper where the noise came from, and what she saw made her stumble back, dropping her flashlight. Behind the paper wasn't drywall. It was a hollow wooden partition filled with rotted beams and, worse, peering holes. Eye-level holes carved into the wood. She picked up her flashlight and aimed it inside. For a moment she saw nothing but darkness. Then her beam caught the outline of something pale. Skin? A hand? Her light trembled as she stepped closer, and that's when a face appeared in the hole. Not a reflection, not a trick of the shadows. A woman's face, hollow-eyed, skin gray, lips cracked open into a silent scream. Dana screamed and stumbled backward, falling hard against the nightstand. When she looked up again, the face was gone. But something else had appeared, written across the wall in large, shaky letters. Welcome back, Sheriff. Her flashlight flickered out completely. She stumbled toward the door, heart pounding, trying to remember which direction the car was. But when she burst outside, The parking lot was no longer empty. All 12 doors were wide open, and figures stood in each doorway, faint, shimmering silhouettes, like outlines burned into the air. Men, women, and a small child clutching something like a teddy bear. They didn't move, didn't speak. But as Dana backed away, she noticed one thing that made her stomach twist. They were facing room 9, not her, watching it, waiting for something. A sound echoed behind her, a low rumble like a door slamming shut. She turned, but room 9's door was already closed tight. Then, slowly, it began to open on its own. Inside, the shadows shifted, and for the briefest second, Dana saw Ethan Cole, the missing man, standing in the center of the room. His clothes were torn, eyes vacant. His mouth moved as if whispering something, but no sound came out. Then, suddenly, his head jerked toward her with unnatural speed. His eyes met hers, and she could finally hear him. A hoarse whisper that chilled her blood. "You came back." Just like before. Before she could respond, the floor beneath her gave way. She crashed through the rotted boards into pitch darkness. The air below was wet and cold, thick with the smell of decay. When she raised her flashlight, its weak beam revealed a hidden crawl space, lined with wooden walls covered in scratches. Some looked like words, others looked like claw marks. And then she saw them. Bodies. 3 of them. A man, a woman, and a little girl, half mummified by time. Their faces twisted in frozen terror. Each one had a small hole bored through their skull, right at the temple. The man's mouth was open, filled with dirt. Something shiny glinted between his teeth. A motel key. Dana reached forward, trembling, brushing the dirt aside. Room 9. Before she could react, a soft voice whispered from the dark behind her, the voice of a little girl. "He made us watch." The beam of her flashlight flickered, and then darkness. When Dana finally crawled out into the open air hours later, the motel was gone. Only sand, wind, and the echo of whispers remained. But in her hand, she still clutched the cold brass key. And carved into it now, where the words, "See you tonight," had been, was something new. Checked in. The next morning, Sheriff Dana Holloway sat motionless in her office, staring at the brass motel key resting on her desk. The desert light slanted through the blinds, painting long, ghostly stripes across the metal. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even changed her clothes. Her radio was silent. Her phone was dead. Every rational part of her mind told her what she'd seen couldn't have been real. But the dirt under her fingernails, the bruises on her arms, and the faint smell of smoke in her hair said otherwise. The motel key gleamed faintly in the morning sun, its engraving clear as day. Checked in. Dana picked it up carefully, half expecting it to burn her skin. She'd gone back to the site at dawn, driven by the impossible need to prove to herself that she wasn't losing her mind. But there had been nothing. No ruins, no burnt foundation, just flat desert earth. Like the Moonlight Motel had never existed at all. She tried to tell herself she had hallucinated the entire thing. Stress, exhaustion, dehydration. It was all possible. Until she noticed something else on her desk. A file she had never seen before. Its label, written in her own handwriting. Moonlight Motel. Case number 314. She froze. What the hell? Her name was listed as the investigating officer. The date marked October 13th, 1996, the day after the motel's fire. But Dana hadn't even joined the police academy until 2002. She flipped open the folder, her hands trembling. Inside were black and white crime scene photos, charred debris, broken glass, and 3 bodies pulled from the rubble. The last photo made her stomach turn. It was a picture of her, 15 years old, standing outside the burnt motel, covered in soot, staring blankly at the camera. Her breath caught in her throat. No, that's not possible. But she remembered something then, like a dream slipping through fog. A smell of smoke. A woman screaming. A man banging on a door that wouldn't open. She'd buried that memory for decades, never questioning why she avoided that stretch of highway. Now she knew. She had been there. By noon, Dana was driving again. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She needed answers, and the only person who might have them was the county archivist, Ernest Gibbons, a frail man who'd spent 40 years cataloging forgotten police reports. When she arrived, he was hunched over a filing cabinet, humming an old tune. "Sheriff Holloway," he said without looking up. "I was just thinking about you. Strange, isn't it?" Dana frowned. "Why?" He smiled weakly. "Because I had a dream last night. About room 9. Her skin prickled. "What do you know about it, Ernest?" He motioned for her to sit. "You won't find Moonlight Motel on any recent map. It was built in 1954 by a man named Arthur Vance. He ran it until the night it burned. They said it was a gas leak, but..." Ernest hesitated, lowering his voice. "People believed he was doing something darker, that he made films in those rooms. Not the kind shown in theaters." Dana's chest tightened. "What kind of films?" "Home movies, but not of living people." He opened a dusty folder and pulled out a faded photograph. A man stood behind a 16mm camera, grinning. His eyes were hollow black pits in the photo, like the ink had bled through. "That's Vance. After the fire, they found reels of film in his basement, burnt, melted, but one was still intact. The footage showed guests sleeping in their rooms, filmed through holes in the walls." Dana's pulse quickened. "The holes..." Ernest nodded. He'd carved them behind every bed. Watched his guests for weeks. Some vanished. The Collins family was the last. "Why wasn't he arrested?" Ernest looked at her for a long time. "Because he died in the fire. Or so they thought. His body was never found. Some say he still checks in guests who lose their way on the highway." Dana stood abruptly. "I have to see the original file." Ernest pointed down the hall. "Basement, drawer marked closed cases. But if you go down there, Sheriff..." His voice lowered to a trembling whisper. "Don't stay after dark." The basement smelled of dust and rusted metal. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like dying insects. Rows of cabinets stretched endlessly, labeled by decade. Dana found the one marked 1990s and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of old VHS tapes and film reels, each tagged Moonlight Motel Evidence. She picked one labeled Tape 9, Final Guest, and slid it into a nearby player. The screen crackled with static, then cleared. The footage was grainy, black and white. A man entered a motel room and set down his suitcase. Ethan Cole. Dana's heart stopped. She watched as Ethan sat on the bed, lit a cigarette, and rubbed his eyes. Behind him, through a small hole in the wall, another camera recorded his every move. The timestamp read June 3rd, 2022, the day he vanished. Then Ethan turned toward the mirror. On its surface were faint letters. "Check out before midnight." Suddenly, the lights flickered. Ethan looked straight into the camera as though he could see her. His mouth moved, and though the tape had no sound, Dana could read his lips. "You came back." The screen went black. Her blood ran cold. She ejected the tape and dropped it, her hands shaking uncontrollably. That message, those same words, Ethan had said them to her inside the motel. But how could he have known her? How could a recording from a burned building show her in the present? Then she noticed something at the edge of the table. A guest book, just like the one she'd seen at the motel front desk. The ink was smeared, but one entry stood out clearly. Ethan Cole, June 3rd, 2022. And right beneath it, in red ink that looked almost fresh, Sheriff Dana Holloway, arrived, October 13th, 1996. Never checked out. Her flashlight flickered as the basement lights dimmed. Somewhere in the darkness, a door creaked open. Dana froze. The voice that followed was soft and calm, yet carried an echo that seemed to come from every direction. "You always come back here, Dana. You just forget. She spun around, gun drawn. Who's there? The shadow in the far corner began to move. Slowly, deliberately. It took the shape of a tall man, wearing a dark overcoat, his face half hidden in shadow. I keep the rooms ready, he said, for my guests who can't let go. Arthur Vance, Dana whispered. He tilted his head slightly, amused. You remember my name? That's progress. I'm not your guest, she hissed. You're dead. Vance stepped closer, the air around him rippling like heat waves. His voice deepened, almost reverent. Death is just another room. Some of us never check out. Dana fired her gun. The shot echoed through the basement, but when the smoke cleared, he was gone. Only a key clattered to the floor, spinning to a stop at her boots. It was brass, aged, engraved with a single number, 10. She stumbled out of the archive, heart hammering. Her car engine roared to life, gravel spraying behind her as she sped down the empty highway. The sun was setting, bleeding orange across the horizon. She should have gone home, should have turned back. But something compelled her forward. The key in her pocket burned against her leg like a brand, pulling her back toward that cursed stretch of desert. As night fell, the Moonlight Motel appeared again, its lights flickering faintly through the dust storm. This time, all 12 doors were open, glowing from within. Room 9's door swung gently in the wind, but room 10, the one from her key, was closed tight. Dana parked, gripping her gun, her breath shallow. She could hear faint music playing from inside the motel, something warped and distant, like an old lullaby playing through broken speakers. When she reached room 10, she hesitated. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a soft, deliberate sound, like it had been waiting for her all along. The room inside was pristine, too clean. The walls gleamed white, the furniture neatly arranged, a camera tripod standing in the corner facing the bed. On the bed lay a guest book, open. There were only 2 names written inside, Arthur Vance and Dana Holloway. Under departure, both spaces were blank. The door slammed shut behind her. The light bulb overhead buzzed, then exploded. And in the flash before total darkness, she saw them again. Ethan, the Collins family, and a dozen more shadowy guests, standing silently in the corners of the room, watching, waiting. And from behind the wall, Arthur Vance's voice whispered once more, "Now we can finish the film." The air inside room 10 grew thick, heavy enough to choke on. Dust floated in slow motion through the single shaft of moonlight slicing across the bed. Dana Holloway stood frozen, one hand still gripping the door handle that had just slammed shut behind her. Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The figures surrounding her didn't speak. They didn't even breathe. Ethan Cole's hollow eyes stared straight ahead, his face drained of anything human. The little girl from the Collins family clutched her stuffed bear, its button eyes hanging by a thread. The other guests, all 12 of them, stood in the shadows like mannequins waiting for direction. And in that moment, the overhead light flickered once, humming with electricity. A second later, the camera in the corner whirred to life. Its red recording light blinked on. Dana felt her throat tighten. "No," she whispered. "You're not doing this." But the camera turned on its tripod, all on its own, until its unblinking eye fixed on her. Then came the voice, low, calm, and sickeningly familiar. "Welcome home, Dana." She turned toward the sound. From the adjoining door between room 9 and 10 stepped Arthur Vance. He looked unchanged from the photograph Ernest had shown her earlier. Same slicked hair, same pale grin. Only his eyes betrayed him. They were bottomless voids, black and glistening like oil. Dana raised her gun again, her hand trembling. "You're dead, Vance." He smiled faintly, his voice smooth as silk. "And yet here you are talking to me. What do you want from me?" Vance moved closer, his shoes not quite touching the floor. "You already know. he said softly. You always knew. You were my last guest. Her grip tightened on the gun. I was a child. I didn't even know you. Oh, but you did, he said, tilting his head. You lived just down the road. Your mother was my housekeeper. You loved to play in the rooms when she worked. You'd hide behind the curtains and pretend to be invisible. I used to watch you through the walls. Dana's stomach turned. You're lying. Vance's grin widened. You called me Uncle Art. A flash of memory hit her like lightning, her small hands pressing against a cool wall, hearing laughter on the other side. A camera clicking. Her mother's voice saying, Dana, don't go in there. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. No, she breathed. No, that's not possible. Oh, it's very possible, Vance whispered. You were the first child I filmed. You were the only one who survived the fire. And when you grew up, you came back. Because a part of you never left. The lights flickered again. The camera's motor whined louder. On the wall behind Dana, the old wallpaper began to curl, revealing rows of wooden boards, each carved with names. She stepped closer, shining her flashlight. Every guest who had ever stayed at the Moonlight Motel was etched into that wall. The Collins family, Ethan Cole, Ernest Gibbons, even her own name, written twice, Dana Holloway, checked in 1996. Dana Holloway, checked in 2022, and beneath both, scratched in jagged letters, never checked out. Her breath came in short gasps. You can't keep me here. Vance chuckled softly, walking toward the camera. You've already been here for years. Every time you leave, the film resets. You drive away thinking it's over, but it's only the reel starting again. He pointed at the blinking light on the camera. You see, Dana, this motel doesn't burn. It remembers. It feeds on those who stay too long. You, me, Ethan, the Collins family, we're all just frames. The room began to spin, the walls melting like old film catching fire. The smell of smoke filled the air again, the same choking chemical scent she'd buried deep in her mind since childhood. Through the haze, Dana saw herself as a little girl sitting on the motel floor, staring up at a man with a camera. Arthur's voice echoed, distorted and overlapping itself. Smile for the real, sweetheart. That's it. Don't move. Then the image burned away in a flash of white. Dana screamed, clutching her head. The floorboards beneath her rattled violently. Ethan and the others began to move now, not walking, but twitching like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. Their faces contorted into silent cries, mouths opening wider than seemed possible. The sound that filled the air wasn't human. It was static, overlapping whispers, like every voice that had ever died there was trying to speak at once. Arthur stood in the center of it all, calm, almost proud. They belong here. You all do. You're part of my final masterpiece. The walls split open, revealing narrow tunnels behind them. Inside, dozens of cameras were embedded in the wood, their red lights blinking like eyes. Dana's fury cut through her terror. You didn't build a motel, she shouted. You built a tomb. Arthur's smile faded. For the first time, something like anger flashed in his dark eyes. No, I built eternity. He reached toward her, his hand stretching longer than human, fingers curling like claws. And now you'll never leave. But something inside Dana changed in that moment. Maybe it was defiance. Maybe it was pure survival. She remembered the basement, the old tapes, and the one thing every victim had in common, the mirror. She turned toward it now, that cracked rectangle of glass hanging over the dresser. Through the smoke and light, she could see faint reflections. The ghosts, the child, Arthur standing behind her. And suddenly, she understood. The motel wasn't a place. It was a loop, a recording trapped in reflection. Arthur's camera didn't just film, it captured. It held their souls inside the silvered glass of mirrors, replaying their terror for eternity. She stared into her own reflection and whispered, I'm not your film. Then she raised her gun and fired, not at Arthur, but straight into the mirror. The glass shattered, exploding outward in a blinding burst of light. The sound that followed was like the world tearing apart. 1,000 screams, 1,000 memories unspooling all at once. The figures around her dissolved into smoke. The room shook violently. Arthur's voice bellowed through the chaos. "You can't destroy what's already recorded," Dana shouted back through the noise. "Then I'll erase it." She fired again, hitting the camera. The red light flickered and died. The walls groaned and splintered as flames erupted from the floor, swallowing the room whole. Arthur reached for her one last time, his face twisting with rage, but as the fire consumed him, he began to crumble into ash, scattering like burned film. Dana fell to her knees, coughing, the world collapsing around her. Heat seared her lungs, but she could see something beyond the flames. A door. The same door she had entered through, now glowing white. She crawled toward it, every breath a struggle. When she reached it, she turned back for a moment. Room 9 and 10 were gone. Only the desert wind roared through a black void where the motel had stood. And for the first time, the voices were silent. She pushed the door open and stepped into the cool night air. The highway stretched before her, empty, endless, real. Her patrol car sat parked on the shoulder, engine idling. The brass key was gone from her pocket. In its place was a small piece of mirror, smooth and cold. For a long moment she just stood there, breathing. Then, trembling, she whispered to herself, "It's over." But as she climbed into her car, the radio crackled to life. Static at first. Then a faint, familiar voice. "Room 9. Vacancy." Her eyes widened. She turned off the radio immediately, but the sound didn't stop. It came from behind her now, from the back seat. A man's voice. Calm, polite. "Evening, Sheriff. I believe you still owe me one final scene." She turned slowly. The passenger seat was empty, but the rearview mirror, cracked down the center, showed Arthur Vance sitting behind her, smiling through the reflection. And hanging from the mirror by a chain was a single brass key swaying gently as the car idled. Room 9.